Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge Week 13 waiver wire video, where we will go over the injuries, who's coming back, who might come back, and of course, who just got injured in the previous week, and how long will it be until we get them back. Of course, all lengths of time that I have in here are estimations to the best of my ability, the estimations that I can get based on the information that we have. And of course, we do have a big bye week coming up in week 13. We're going to see Baltimore, Buffalo, Chicago, Minnesota, the New York Giants, and the Las Vegas Raiders all on bye. And next week will be the last week where any teams will be on bye, and that will be the Cardinals and the Commanders. So keep that in mind. Let's look at the injury follow-up, then we'll get on into the actual waiver wires, of course, and there are, you can go down below and look on the time stamps that I have if you just want to look at a specific position here. You can also find this up on the website, www.theffforge.com, and there's a link down in the description. It's also up ahead of me, above me, a little ways there. But with the follow-up here, Michael Thomas went on IR this past week, not expecting to see him back until the earliest would be week 16. He could come off of IR. Same with Luke Musgrave last week, so week 16 IR is the soonest we could see them back. Darren Waller might be able to come back next week. And Justin Jefferson, as you saw, they have a bye coming up this weekend, so next week will be the bye. I should add, any injuries that happen on Monday Night Football have not happened yet. I'm filming this prior to Monday Night Football, so if there are any major updates to, not necessarily the injuries, but if there's any major updates to the waiver wire itself due to anything that happens on Monday night, or if I just missed something, forgot someone, and realize it later, I will put that down in the, the comments section, and it'll be pinned so you can find that easily if it exists. Now, for the rest, we have a lot of guys who could come back here. Michael Wilson could come back as soon as this week. It could be another 3 weeks. Shoulder injury, bit of a, depending on exactly what it is, a long time period for recovery. Depending on exactly the injury. Deonta Foreman, ankle injury, missed this Monday. Could come back next week. Could be another couple of weeks. Noah Brown could come back. Last week, they were optimistic for both Devon Achane, Kenneth Walker, and Aaron Jones to possibly play. They weren't able to make it for their respective games, but obviously, I think that would carry over into this next week. So I believe that all of those guys are optimistic to quite possibly return this upcoming weekend. Dallas Goedert with that broken forearm could be, he's pushing to come back this week, could be another week yet. T. Higgins, I assume, is still week to week until we get further news. Could be day to day this week. We'll find out. Kendre Miller, Dawson Knox, Zach Ertz, Josh Palmer, all guys who could return. Kendre Miller should return at this point in time. He's at the end of one of these 1 to 3 weeks originally type of timelines. So I would expect him to probably return unless there's been any complications to his recovery. As far as Week 12, we did see a couple of quarterbacks, DTR and Baker Mayfield, get injured. DTR with that concussion, typically that's going to be 1 week that they're going to be missing. As far as Baker Mayfield and that ankle injury, usually I put 1 to 3 weeks for ankle injuries, and that has worked very well. If they go on IR, then it's more severe, and they're going to be missing at least 4 weeks. But at the same time, you also know there's a decent chance that they might be good when they come back, when they go on IR. In the case of Baker Mayfield being a quarterback, I do believe that they're more likely to play on a bum ankle as a quarterback. It's a little, not necessarily less important, but still easier to be successful at that position with a bum ankle. So I'm giving Baker Mayfield a 0 to 3 week timeline instead of 1 to 3 weeks. As far as Chris Olave, he also had a concussion. He is probably going to miss 1 week with that. Also, Rashid Shaheed had a thigh injury in that game. Typically, this would probably be a 1 to 4 week time period that we would expect for him to miss. Demario Douglas had a head injury. They have not called it a concussion to my awareness at this point in time. So, obviously, if it's a concussion, we can expect him to miss a week. Otherwise, we'll see. We'll wait to hear more on that. And last up is Amari Cooper with a ribs injury. 0 to 4 weeks is the time frame on that. Typically, a lot of rib injuries are going to be just playing through pain is going to be the biggest thing. So he very well could come back this week. Might miss some time depending on, a lot of factors with that. So that's where we are at with the injuries. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody. Let's move on to the All right, and welcome back to the waiver wire. I have done a couple of changes. So the strength of schedule is no longer going to be the season-long strength of schedule. I have looking forward here just to the playoffs at this point in time when it comes to this strength of schedule score here out of 5, 5 being a strong, a good strength of schedule. 1 would be a not-so-good strength of schedule for the respective player. I've also gone through and highlighted top 25% matches, like if it's a 25% in the league, if it's a top 8 matchup in the league or a bottom 8 matchup in the league based on average fantasy points scored against these defenses from this position, then if it's a good thing, it's highlighted in green. If there's a bottom 8 matchup, then it is highlighted in red. So my quarterbacks list is going to be, I believe it's the exact same as last week. We've got Jordan Love, Matt Stafford, Gardner Minshew, and Derek Carr on this list. Still have Jordan Love at the top of it, though he does have the worst strength of schedule, so keep that in mind. That being said, a couple of decent matchups coming up in a couple of weeks. New York Giants, Tampa Bay right after that. I like those matchups pretty good, pretty well. And so for Jordan Love, probably don't want to have to play him next week, but he has been on the rise. Do see him as the most upside guy. Schedule does scare you a little bit. Matt Stafford, not a good schedule in the short term. The playoff schedule, however, is quite nice. He has been playing worse and worse throughout the season, but you have to think that thumb injury could be part of the reason why he's been playing worse as of late. I think this team will be, at their most healthy later on in the season here. So I am optimistic about Matt Stafford down the stretch, and in a couple of weeks, we do see him facing Washington. Really good matchup there. So he's a guy you could definitely continue to hold on to, grab as a stash, especially for the playoffs, etc. That could offer you some high-end, upside there. Gardner Minshew, I don't love it, but not terrible. Derek Carr, don't love it, but still 2 of the better options that should be available out there. You might see, I almost put Kenny Pickett as strictly as a streamer, not really a could roster kind of guy, but I decided not to because he's playing up against Arizona, so I think a lot of people are going to be really high up on him. A lot of people have continuously, week after week, said, oh, Arizona sucks, let's rank these quarterbacks really well against them, despite the fact that throughout the entirety of the season, teams pretty much run on them. The quarterbacks don't need to do a lot against them and thus haven't scored a whole lot of fantasy points against them most weeks. So just keep that in mind when it comes to Kenny Pickett. Now, let's move on to the running back, which you've already been able to see my top 3 waiver wire options on the screen there. So my running backs are also pretty similar to last week. Move Jeff Wilson from the top of this list onto the bottom of this waiver wire list because at this point, after last week, you probably need to put on some fab on him / other people in your league. He might have caught their eye out. So if you missed out on that, now you might have to pay a little bit to get him. But Keaton Mitchell got the most work that we've seen him get as far as a percentage of the backfield work, snap share. So get him on your roster if he's still available in your league. He's still something like only 33% owned after the last couple of weeks. A lot of us in the industry, I'm part of the industry. Pretty much, I don't want to say screaming his name from the top of the hills, but him being an option that we've recommended getting on your rosters. So he's still out in your league. I think he's a must roster at this point in time. His workload continues to get bigger. I will say I don't foresee him getting a majority of the workload here. He almost had 40% of the snap share last week. 40, maybe 45%, I think is about where it's going to get capped off. But that's plenty for Keaton Mitchell. We saw what he can do with that several times over by now. So he's a big play guy, and that's what we wanted to see. So he's in that range where I think you can start to feel comfortable even playing him in most matchups. Ty Chandler, another guy, he's got a week off. So, you might be able to get him at a discount. You might be able to get him as a free agent. Go ahead, get somebody else as a waiver wire, or put him as your final target. Whatever the case, see in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks, that's a good matchup there. As you see, the playoff schedule is good there. He is in a split backfield, however, so the upside is limited. But and we'll see what happens this Monday night because that split kind of lessened last week by a little ways. So there's a chance he would be off of this waiver list after Monday night. We'll see about that. That is something that I would put down in the comments if that is the case. And then Jeff Wilson, as I said, moved him up from the stashes on up here. The only thing I want to say, don't go crazy over Jeff Wilson. You should probably roster him because we don't know Devon Achan's status for sure at this point in time, but it's optimistic that Achan will be returning, in which case I don't think that you could ever think of starting Jeff Wilson, and he's just simply a top-end stash. So be careful about going to loco on Jeff Wilson with Achan coming back. Then some guys, once again, grab them at the end of the week. Whatever the case, you should be holding them on through the weekend at the back end of your roster if possible. And the guys that I like the most to do that, in case of injury to the starter, of course, would be Elijah Mitchell, then Tyjae Spears, Kenneth Gainwell. Great options. Rico Dowdle, Roshan Johnson, Tank Bigsby, Jaleel McLaughlin, all solid options. Rico honestly stands out maybe above these guys, should almost be bolded here compared to Roshan, Tank, and Jaleel. And as some free agent guys that you could grab to start this week, not really stash guys, Antonio Gibson going up against Miami, Ezekiel Elliott going up against the Chargers, not a great matchup there, Tyler Algier going up against the Jets, that's a solid matchup. And then Samaje Perine, Royce Freeman, also guys that in a pinch, you could just grab them and start them, and they're not going to be ranked well or anything, but we saw both of them just go off this past week. So that's why they're here, and this list, I think, is relatively unchanged as well from last week. I know nobody new was added onto it, so that's what that can provide you sometimes. Now, let's move on to the wide receivers. Look at that. There they are. And once again, not a whole lot of changes. There weren't, injuries that made us think, oh, my God, who's new? Well, there were a couple that I'll bring. Why don't I just cover that first, especially with the injuries in New Orleans. For 1 week here, A.T. Perry's really going to get thrown in there and get some work. Probably would rather play him in DFS than you would in regular fantasy football, weekly fantasy football, or season long, I should say. But, if you like to gamble or whatever the case, A.T. Perry's the type of guy there. But I do think he's still worth a stash because he still might be the third wide receiver for several weeks here, and if he can prove himself this week, then maybe you'd have confidence in starting him a couple weeks down the road here, depending on the matchup. Jalen Hyatt also got a bit of an opportunity with Darius Slayton being injured this last week. Coming into the week, he was doubtful, did end up being active for the game, was limited in how much work he got, and so Jalen Hyatt got the most work he's seen in a few weeks, and the most work he's seen with Tommy DeVito, and he took advantage of that, and he had a pretty darn solid game. And so you could look to see if he can build upon that going forward here. And I think it's very possible. So he is a high-end stash. Both of those two new to the list. While we're on the stashes, Josh Palmer, another guy who I told you last week to go ahead and get him ahead of time. And now he's probably going to be coming back. So this Los Angeles Chargers team is desperate for some help at the wide receiver position. We know that Josh Palmer is probably better than Quentin Johnston, the guys who they've currently been trying to get some help from. So I like him a lot. And then the rest of them are guys who you could just like I talked about with the running back free agents, you can probably just go pick them up off of your free agent stash and play them and hope for the best in any given week. Now, for the waiver wire options, I got Josh Downs at the top of this list still, going up against Tennessee this coming week, so that's a great matchup coming up. Then a couple of mediocre matchups after that. Jaden Reed, second on this list. Really, really tough matchup if you need somebody in the short term, going up against Kansas City. But after that, you got the New York Giants, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, really good matchups for him. Solid, 3 out of 5 for the playoff schedule there for him as well. So I like him a fair bit. He was at the top of this list, I believe, last week, so moved him on up. Demario Douglas was second on this list, I think, last week with that injury. Probably won't be able to use him this week against the Los Angeles Chargers, but then he's got Pittsburgh, another solid matchup, Kansas City after that. But in the playoffs, it is looking like it's overall a really good schedule there for Demario Douglas, so it might be something that you can grab now and hold on to if you can't get some of those other guys that I have ahead of him, and if you don't need immediate help. Just going to bring us to the tight ends, which is super easy this week, is Pat Freiermuth, okay? There's one guy out there that if he's out there, you should have. And I had him at the top of this list last week. Doesn't seem like enough people listen to me. So go out and get him if he's still out there, going up against Arizona, New England, Indianapolis in the next 3 weeks. I don't believe I highlighted this. What I will say, though, Arizona, not like a great tight end matchup, actually, but just allowed a lot of points to tight end last week. So I believe, at least, going off the top of my head. So that's good. The strength of schedule for the playoffs, not bad for him. And with that new offensive coordinator, it seems like he's going to get some better routes to run going forward. We saw that offense be the best it's been in a long time in week 1. So, yeah, you know, I'm not thinking greatness for this Pittsburgh offense going forward, but better, definitely. And last up for my DST streaming options, going to give you the Atlanta Falcons at the top of this list. I don't love any of these options, but yeah, Atlanta's at the top of it against the New York Jets. Tampa Bay going up against Carolina, solid matchup. Hopefully they could take advantage of that. Indianapolis Colts going up against Tennessee. They've been pretty good. Tennessee, I think under Will Levis is more susceptible to, you know, interceptions and whatnot that Indianapolis could take advantage of. And Jacksonville versus Cincinnati originally had it at the top of this list, but did have to move it down with Jake Browning there, though. I do get excited about that. The prospects for Jacksonville this upcoming week. So there is the waiver wire list for week 13, all the injuries and all that good stuff. If you have any questions, just ask them down in the comments. I'll be happy to answer. And, yeah, take care. I will see you guys with the rankings videos coming throughout the week. Peace out.